Boundaries. This is CD3. Here's Dr. Norm Wise.
After you've yelled, screamed, shouted, called each other, no, that isn't the end result. After you argue with somebody a great deal, you trust them more, right? No. Oh, you have a great deal of respect for them. See, all the real significant things we want in a relationship, argument cannot give. Arguments like going down to the casino and basically, they have a new game there and they say, sir, would you like to play? They have the balloons there, confetti's falling down from the sky, and you say, sure. You put your $100 down, they flip down 5 cards, you look at your 5 cards. The lady just keeps looking at you. You go, boy, this is weird. She hasn't explained to me how to play. So you put down your 5 cards and she takes your $100. And she says, would you like to play again? And you go, wait a minute, what are the rules here? How do you win? Oh, sir, no one wins. Well, that's argument. Argument is the most natural way we try to overcome differences of opinion. Our society is addicted to argument. We're addicted to being rude and trying to hurt people until they do what we want. We have that in all types of social levels. But it doesn't work. Can't work. It makes people less trusting, less loving, less respectful. In no way does it work. So if someone does verbally hurt us, we end the conversation. If someone emotionally manipulates us and we catch on to it, we confront them. Wait a minute. You were just trying to trick me, and I don't appreciate it. Or I think you were trying to trick me. That's okay. I feel you were trying to trick me. That's okay. If someone attempts to force us to have sex against our wills, we refuse. You don't have sex just because you're afraid that the other person will be unhappy. That's not healthy sex. So if the other person is going to pout because you don't have sex, they need a counselor, they don't need you. Because that's not healthy. If someone uses God, this is what I say, playing the God card. You get into a conflict with somebody and they quote a verse or something, and these are people where God is always on their side for some reason. For some reason God never sees it your way. God is always on their side. And what it is, it's just playing the God card. And and for us who are sensitive to wanting to do the will of God, it creates a lot of guilt. And guilt sometimes gets us to say yes when we really feel we should say no. It's religious abuse, by the way. And if someone threatens abandonment or rejection, we refuse to agree simply based on that threat. In other words, say, listen, I will be sad if you carry out that threat, but I'm not going to violate my conscience. I'm not going to violate my reason. I'm not going to violate my logic. I'm not going to violate what I believe to be the right thing to do simply because you're threatening me. So I'm sorry that you feel you would have to end a relationship over this, but that's your choice, not mine. See, I'm not rejecting you, you are rejecting me. Now, some of the phrases I'm using, by the way, are very effective in some of these dynamics. I then give you a chart there that just basically tells you that sometimes we will have set a boundary. You will say, I don't want somebody in my inner circle, and they will try to worm their way into their inner circle by creating a close relationship with somebody that's in your inner circle so that then you feel compelled to bring them in. Again, you just have to kind of keep your own boundaries straight. It does get complicated, and we have to just be aware we try to do the best we can. Okay, now saying yes is not always a loving thing to do. If I say yes to something that I know is wrong, that's not good. If I say yes, and this keeps me from doing God's will, that is love, this is not good. If I say yes and enables another person's vice, this is not good. That's enabling. If I know someone's addicted to drugs and I give them cash, that's not love, because the drugs are going to kill them. If I say yes to something that violates my conscience, this is not good. In other words, it's not good for me to violate my own inner sense of right and wrong just to make you happy, because that's a horrible violation of my own heart. And so that's not good. And also, if I say yes and therefore cannot meet another obligation, then it's not good. In other words, I said yes to you, but now I really am neglecting something that I should be doing. In other words, let's say, I didn't want to disappoint the people. I didn't want to disappoint Diana in Boca. She was on the phone and she said, hey, listen, can you come up to teach in Boca? And I said, well, I can tell you really are upset about me saying no. She wasn't, but theoretically. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And you guys come here and there's nobody here. Well, you see, what I've done is by saying yes, I've really hurt other people. So you see, you have to be willing to set boundaries or you're going to hurt somebody. And you may end up hurting the people most important in your life simply because sometimes the most loving thing you can say to someone is no. In other words, if you think your yes is going to actually bring harm to the other person, and by the way, that's why you're taking 24 hours to think about it. These aren't questions like, should we, go to the natural food emporium or should we go to, McDonald's? This is not the type of questions we're talking about. These are significant questions. We need to say, okay, we'll take 24 hours. Are you finding it hard to remain sane, stable, and spiritual and safe because they're in your house all the time? Oh. So sooner or later, what's going to happen in the relationship is you're going to have a bad day. And you're not going to be sane, stable, spiritual, safe. And you're going to blow up. And you'll do more damage in the relationship if you had simply said, hey, listen, we need to set some boundaries. You can't eat out of my refrigerator at 3 in the morning.
Why not?
Oh, I understand. First of all people know to get you to do what I want, I will send over a cold prickly. And therefore, you will now do what I want. But that doesn't really mean they're too serious about it. And again, remember the sandwich technique. You always start off with affirmation. You would say to your neighbor, listen, I really do appreciate you guys. I'm glad that we as neighbors know each other. That's really important because I think a community is so important and I do care for you. I've demonstrated that. But what I'm finding is we need to set up some rules about how we interact here. And I've come up with some ideas. I'd love to get your feedback as well. But I need some time sometimes where I just know my apartment is my apartment and where I can, do some things that I need to do. And so there just needs to be some boundaries about how we interact. And those boundaries, I really think, are going to enhance our relationship and going to help us to care for each other more. And I know, too, it'll just help me to, have a space where I can really, take care of stuff that I need to take care of. And so I would appreciate your help in us finding some rules. Now, again, you see, this is the other thing that's to keep us from setting boundaries. We assume many times a worse reaction than the person will actually give us. Because, again, we don't know what they'll do. If they handle it in a mature way, they say, oh, of course, you're right. We should, think about this. And they'll talk to you, and they'll have an adult conversation. And so that's definitely within the realm of possibility. The key is that you want to talk to them before you've lost control. Because, you see, if you don't, then, you're going to blow up the relationship because, you're going to blow up and be a martyr. Blowing up, martyrs can blow up too. I've been sacrificing for you for 5 years. I have given you the last piece of bread in my house, and you never once have appreciated it. I want you out. I want you out now. I've had it. Yeah, that'll usually blow up the relationship. Because you see what you've done, you've come to the end of your rope. Understand, we all have an end to our rope. Okay? To deny that you have an end to your rope is that whole thing about you being God again. Sorry. You're not God. You're finite. We all have ends to our rope. Right. The thing is that you have to choose your words. You speak the truth in love. You choose healthy communication. But you can talk about hard things in wise ways. You can find the right words. And especially it's important to have the conversation before you came to the end of your rope. Because once you come to the end of your rope, you just are going to emotionally vomit all over them. And people don't like to have emotional vomit on them. And that's all that happens when you come to the end of your rope. And sooner or later, you're going to come to the end of your rope. The way to do that is say, I got to change, I got to climb up the rope a little farther. I'm going to set a boundary. I'm not going to get as close to that end of the rope. I need to be right in the middle. So we have to define what we can give and can't give. And then people have to decide. It's interesting what we have found here in the church. There have been times when we first got into the ministry here, we would do really extraordinary things. We would pay people's whole mortgages. We would give people thousands of dollars and all this other stuff. And I thought at the beginning that, by having such extraordinary acts of love, that people would respond with extraordinary gratitude, and this would build the ministry. You give to people at desperate moments, and you totally come in and solve their problem. Yeah, I had martyr complex really bad. And what we found, none of those people stayed with the ministry. I mean, we did crazy stuff. We came in, people's whole lives would be falling apart. We come in. Within 6 months after our extraordinary sacrifice, we're a small church, so we don't have much, they'd all be gone. Now, it's either because they were ashamed because they had, to get so much from us. I don't know all the dynamics. It's very hard to understand human behavior. But it was the opposite of what my formula said it should be. So we changed the formula. There was this other pastor who, they're a very small church, and pastor didn't have much money, church didn't have much money. And every once in a while, this couple, usually about 3, 4, 5 times a year, this couple would say, listen, we don't have enough money to pay our rent. Could you guys pay our rent? And so sometimes the church would come up with the money. Sometimes the pastor would come out with the money, And so one time, the church didn't have the money, the pastor didn't have money. Limitation. He was going to have to go and say no to them. Boundary. So he went in and he was really sad. He was feeling guilty over not being able to do something he couldn't do. So he tells him, well, the woman starts yelling and screaming and shouting and saying, I knew it, you Christians are all alike, you're all hypocritical, you don't care or love for anybody, you guys are, the greatest deception ever presented to the human race, yada, 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 yada. She was very verbally abusive to this guy. The guy grabs him, physically grabs him, marches him through the living room. They had a porch there. The guy throws him into the front yard because the guy was kind of big. The pastor said, somewhere between the porch and the front yard, I had a change of my philosophy of ministry. Because you see, the reality is they didn't have some good boundaries in place. So what we found, it's true. If someone comes and they say, listen, I need $160 for my electric bill. We have, first of all, a group of people. Group of people usually have a better way of making decisions than one person. And so we have a group of people who say, well, out of the limited funds we have, how much should we invest? Because guess what? The church doesn't have limitless funds. When I say yes to one person, when we said yes to these people where we gave thousands of dollars to, guess what else we said? No to a ton of other people. Because we have limited funds. I asked President Obama if we could just print it. But he said no. The government's that's not acceptable. I would use it for good purposes. I mean, I'm not selfish. I'm a parent. I would use it for good purpose. So, the whole 9 yards. So the whole thing is, so what we do is we prayerfully, carefully think about it. We never make the decision at the time when the people ask us. We give ourselves 24 hours. We make it as a group where we can dialogue with it. We've got X number of dollars. How much should we invest in this? And we come back and say, listen, we can give you $50. That's not going to solve their $160 light bill. But you see, we're saying that's not our responsibility. It's your responsibility to figure that out. You're going to have to look for other means. We're not God. But yeah, we care about you. And what we have decided is we can give $50. What we have found is the people that are given $50 are more grateful and happier with us and speak better about us than the people we gave $2,000 to. Bizarre, see? But it's all boundaries. Now, by the way, it also means we have the ability to invest in more people's lives, because you see, we're not simply trying to solve all the problems for one person. Now we're helping many, but we're also doing it with a clear communication. We're not God. Because you see, idols are not good for the soul. And it also allows those people to have their own adult independency and to look for other solutions. Now it's still, yeah, we have to take a chance. What if they don't get $160? That's a possibility. It's outside our control, really. Okay? Because you see, the other method we have seen just doesn't work. It doesn't really work. It wouldn't minister to them in ways that are more important, which is part of that. They're less likely to not pay their electric bill when we don't solve the whole problem. Because also what happened, when we solved the whole problem once, what did they expect us to do the next time? Solve the whole problem again. We gave them a false expectation of what we were capable of doing. We were giving them the impression, we can solve all your problems, when that's not true. When the people come back for the third month and say, we need the mortgage paid, what do we have to say? No, we don't have the money. What's their reaction? Cold, prickly. They figure they can get us to say yes if they treat us bad. Well, this isn't borrowing. Charity, there's a difference between charity and borrowing. Never confuse the two. If you give, you give. If you borrow, you should be charging interest. And that's a whole other deal. But no, charity's charity. Boundaries go both ways. You can say to a person, again, sandwich, I have so appreciated how you have wanted to help me. I do appreciate so much that you are willing to sacrifice for me. You're one of the most generous people in my life. But I have a bad gut feeling about this current situation. And even though you're willing to give me this, let's not do it. Because I do appreciate it, but I just don't feel good about it. Understand this. You don't have to convince the other person that your boundary is right. You don't have to convince the other person that your boundary is right. The reason for that, you really can't, ultimately, in most cases.
And it's codependent.
Right. The thing is that you have to have a right to say no, you have to have a right to say no. Now, you can, if the person is a safer person, you can say, these are some of the thoughts I have. But the thing is, if they start trying to debate you and push you out of your no, that's when you have to go back to, I just don't feel good about this. Because the bottom line is, if you say yes to something that you don't feel good about, it's not going to end up good. Now, you can say, let me spend some more time thinking about it. And our feelings about stuff can change. That's perfectly legitimate. We can change our mind. But we want to do it slowly. Understand, again, speed kills. When someone is pushing you to make a decision, you always want to say, wait. You may not want to say no, because maybe eventually you want to say yes to this person, but you want to say wait, because you don't want to simply be saying yes because you feel forced to. I mean, sometimes we end up, sometimes we're happy with the yes we gave, but we didn't like how it was attained. We felt beat up. If we're feeling beat up, we need to take a step back, slow it down, and say no. Very, very, very important. Yeah, where are we in this thing? Basically, this does tell us that we can be sacrificial. Last page is this, Matthew 5:38 and 48. I think the one here that I like the best is Luke. He said to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So there is this place where we should open the door to simply wild acts of compassion, but they're chosen. We choose to do it. It's unconditional love. It's caring. A couple of things about turning the other cheek. What it really was It wasn't accepting physical abuse. The striking in the cheek was a ceremonial insult, and it was really just saying, don't return evil for evil. The idea here is do try to give more than expected, but not more than you can. So there is this element of grace, there is this element of mercy in human relationships, which we should give, and we can feel good about giving it. But it needs to be something we have prayerfully and carefully decided to give at a particular time. You have to set a boundary and understand a decision to say yes to one person is a decision to say no to others. And so you have to kind of process all that through. Some recommended books. My book, Sane Relationships, by me. I like it. I think it's got good stuff in it. Also, Learning to Love in 27 Days is a book where for 27 days you do a process of journaling that helps you to think through, and part of that is definitely on boundaries. And then also Boundaries, when to say yes and when to say no, to take control of your life, by Henry Cloud. Reading some of these books can help because it can add a lot of information that otherwise you might not have. By the way, thinking about how to handle this stuff is better than just spontaneously doing what you do. In other words, when we only spontaneously do, we end up with 1 to 4 on the board. In other words, we won't really set healthy boundaries. Okay, questions that weren't answered so far. You're saying, oh my goodness, he's ending the evening, and I haven't heard the answer to this question, and that was the whole reason I came. So I don't want anybody to be there. Okay.
What did you say about spontaneous?
The thing is, normal times, spontaneity is overrated. Spontaneity means I will not think about what I say, I'll just say it. I won't think about what I'm going to do, I'll just do it. Okay? Usually, not all the time, but usually that leads us into bad words and bad actions. We are better when we think. We are better when we reflect. Thinking and reflecting take time, so go slow. Speed kills. Who said you had to instantly have a comeback when somebody said something in a discussion? You could just give an echo back. You could say, this is what I hear you saying, and I'm going to take me some time to think about that, so why don't we get together tomorrow sometime and I'll tell you what I reflected on it. Whoever said that we had to carry out conversations at the speed of light? Whoever said that was a requirement? Some people know they can think faster than you. That doesn't mean they think better than you. They just know that they are quicker on their feet. But that doesn't mean you don't have to dance to their tune. So you have the ability. By the way, when they're disappointed with you, in most cases they're not really going to abandon you and reject you forever. What most people will do when they have a boundary set and they're not happy with it and they see you're not moving, within 24 to 48 hours they'll come back, they'll have stuffed it away, and they'll interact with you like the conversation never took place. Now they won't, in a healthy way, try to work out, the feelings about it, because they haven't been trained on how to do that. But they really do value the relationship, and they're not really going to blow the whole relationship over it. And they're just, and once they find out that when they pout, you don't give in, they'll pout less. You get more of whatever you reward in a relationship. You get more of whatever you reward in a relationship. So if you want somebody to be verbally abusive, then when they're verbally abusive, you give them what they want so that they'll stop being verbally abusive. And they say, oh, this worked out pretty good. I started to yell, scream, shout, swear, and they said yes, and I got what I wanted. So next time, when I don't get what I want, I'm going to yell, scream, shout, and swear. My wife had a great boundary of our kids. We had 3 kids and sometimes 4 because cousin Robert was around, and there was 4 of them and 1 of her. And she would be taking them someplace, and they would be have any of you known children can be rude at times? Are you aware of that? They can be rude at times, yeah. And so the thing is, they would be rude, and they would, They would be not listening and being rude and saying rude things to each other and to her. And so what she would do is she would, they all get in the car, and she just walk back inside the house. South Florida, it gets really hot in cars after a certain point, I thought. So they trotted in, and they said, what's going on? She says, I don't drive for rude people. Boundary. Well, you see, wait a minute. She's not going to drive. We're not going to Chuck E. Cheese. And this whole thing kind of broke down here. She would do another thing, they'd be there in Publix and she'd be pushing down the cart. She says, if you guys, are real noisy and I can't think. And when I can't think, I can't choose what treats to take at the end, And so then it was like, shh. Can you think? Yeah. But you see, she was just setting boundaries. Now the thing is, after she set the boundary one time, and they didn't go to Chuck E. Cheese, then if somebody started to be rude on the way to the car, guess what? This isn't a good strategy, because she will not drive. They will not have a benefit. So you see, the bottom line is, you have to decide where you set, but understand you'll get in a relationship whatever you reward. If someone pouts and they, just won't talk to you or whatever, and so you finally break down, this is called, silent abuse, and say, listen, I'm really sorry, what we really mean is, I don't like you pouting, it's causing me emotional hurt. We're not really sorry over what we decided. What it is that we don't think we did something morally wrong, we're just not happy with them pouting. And by the way, choosing words correctly is real important. See, if we said it that way, we wouldn't do it. And but so if at that point you say, listen, okay, it's fine, and so then they of course give you warm fuzzies, give you a hug, but what you've taught them is, if I pout, I get my way. So whatever you reward, you'll get more of in a relationship. Don't reward what you don't like.
If it's negative.
Yeah, this is basically some type of abusive behavior. Quite honestly, no. If you reward, you find somebody doing something right. You find somebody who listens, and so therefore you reward that. You'll get more of it. If a person accepts your no gracefully, okay, and they and it's okay. By the way, it's all right for them to feel hurt over it. It's okay. People, you feel sad every time somebody says no to you. But yeah, when you see them acting more maturely, you want to reward them. So in other words, whatever you reward, you get more of. So be careful what you reward. In other words, one of the ways you reward people is by saying yes. Submission is doing what I don't think is the right thing to do. In other words, that's what submission is. If I'm under an authority, I can appeal to an authority at some point. I can say, would you like to know my thought on this? And if the authority says, no, I don't, we're doing it my way, well, that's part of the golden rule. Those with the gold rule. Okay? So the bottom line is, in that case, you're in a contract with the person. You're not responsible to do it anyway except the way they tell you to do it. If they come in and say, listen, paint the room purple, and you might think purple is the worst color in the world, but you're getting paid to paint the room the color they want it, no, you can't say, well, purple's horrible, I'm going to paint it pink. Okay? So you see, that's defining our relationship. We have to define boundaries within the relationship. Now, if she tells you something to do something that is immoral or against your conscience, that's where you have to respectfully say no. If she's asking you to do something that you think is going to put yourself or others in danger, then you again have to respectfully say no. So there's limits on all human authority. But when the state of Florida says you will drive 65 miles an hour, you can't independently say, I think I can drive safely at 85. And when the police officer pulls you over, say, why did you pull me over? Well, you're going 85. Well, I know, but I can drive safely at 85. It's a ridiculous rule to make me only go 65. So submission is only submission. And by the way, we all have to learn to submit in some relationships. Submission is only submission when the authority is telling me something different than I would do spontaneously. And that's also growing, that's a social thing. That's a thing of my growing up to understand. Adults live in communities and there are rules and we agree when we're in social contract to obey those rules. Now you have freedom. If you feel that this is such a painful, situation, you're free to find a new job. So your boundary can be, I don't like having people tell me what to do. And the way you solve that is you start your own company. And that's why a lot of people, I'll tell you, a lot of entrepreneurs are simply people who don't like anybody telling them what to do. They come to a conclusion, I don't like bosses. I don't like people telling me to do stuff that I know is stupid. Therefore, I'm going to have my own company. Well, but they have a right to do that. They have a right to go ahead and start their own company. And the only problem is they then have to submit to a much harder boss called the customer. And the customer has a tendency to want things that seem to be pretty irrational at times. So you have a hard time beating submission. Now, if you don't listen to the customer, then usually your business dies. Okay? Because, so you see so we got to think through that. So that's not boundary. That's what's my place in the universe. Now, if she was just a total peer and there was no authority structure, yeah, you could just ignore what she said. And she would not like it because she might be a parent, but that wouldn't be a problem, and it wouldn't be a problem at your work because they would say, well, you have no right to tell her what to do. So that would demonstrate. But in this case, she's just not communicating real well, most likely in the middle of leading. And that's welcome to the real world. Weak, wounded, wicked. Every boss is weak, wounded, wicked. Okay? By the way, great anger comes from unrealistic expectations. If I expect the people in my life not to be weak and not to be wounded and not to be wicked, I'll be angry with them all the time. I just have a realistic expectation. I really feel it's true. You ever see the parents of a little kid there, and the little kid has told his first lie? What do the parents do? What do all the adults in the room do when this kid tells his first lie? What's the reaction? Yeah, we act like he's the first person on the planet who has ever told a lie, when every single adult in the room knows they lied. And we try to throw them in this, craziness, like they really do think I'm the first person who lied on this planet, and I must be the most horrible person on the planet. And by the way, the fact they feel that guilty doesn't keep them from lying again. It just tells them, boy, my mistake here was getting caught. This is really a problem, okay? If I'm going to lie, I'm going to make sure they don't catch me because people will really go crazy over it, But if you sat down and say, listen, I understand it's not good to lie, but we all do, and what made you lie? Talk to me about, what were you feeling when you were lying? And there's a lot of different reasons people lie. And then you can start talking about, well, how do you, I know when I feel that way. These are some things I do to try to help me to not lie. You see, now you're talking to them, you're weak, I'm weak. You're wounded, I'm wounded. You're wicked, I'm wicked. What could we do to try to be a little better? See, that's much more human talk. But we have this tendency to, and we do that in relationships. We do that, somebody will do something in a relationship and we'll act, well, this is the first time anybody has ever done this. Come on, we're all adult. We know people mess up a lot. That doesn't mean messing up, but there is no excuse for abuse. But am I surprised when people do bad? Well, I'm going to have to stop reading the newspaper, or I guess a lot of people have done that, or listening to the news, but we live east of Eden. It's a difficult place to live. But there's still a lot of good here. God is still wonderfully involved. There's wonderful things in people as well as wicked things in people, and there's potential in people as well as problems. And it's going to be messy. Welcome to the mess. But if you have a plan, and if you know where your boundaries are, you can kind of process through, which yeses you want to have yeses. By the way, any yes that you really believe is the best, logical, reasonable, loving, caring, spiritual yes, it's a good yes. Because that's all your duty is as a human being. Now, 10 years later, you might find out you were wrong. That's also part of being a human being. Because sometimes we think we were right and we were wrong. But that's all. I can't make a wiser decision than I'm capable of making today. See, that's that limitation again. We can raise problems. We can say, listen, I want to talk to you about something. I want you to listen to me for 5 minutes, and then after that, you can respond. And the problem is that, I think this is a one-way relationship. When we talk, all that ever we talk about is your issues and your problems. And not once in 5 years have we ever talked about, any of my stuff. And I would like to have a more adult relationship with you. I would like there to be a mutual sharing. And I don't mind hearing your stuff. But I also want you to be able to hear my stuff. And that's okay. You can ask that. Okay? Now, you have to have realistic expectations. If someone really is arrested in development, and if they really weren't capable of that, I'm going to need to, I will have some people in my life that really are not emotionally stable. But you see, I don't get angry with them because I don't expect them to be. So I need some people that are sane, stable, spiritual, as much, in a good state to be a support team to me. And then there's other people I have a relationship with, and they're more of a, giving relationship. But even in those giving relationships, so that it doesn't become abusive, it's okay for us to say, listen, this isn't feeling good. Okay? That you have the right to do. You have the right to say, I need to tell you about something. Something isn't working. Now again, sandwich, I do care about you and I want a relationship to continue, but I feel like this is one-sided and that you don't care about my needs, you only want me to care about yours. So could we have times when we talk and we both share? And that when I share with you stuff that that doesn't take away. By the way, there's this problem. The only pain that you have felt and the only pain you ever will feel is your own pain. You can't feel the pain of another person. What actually happens in empathy is that someone is telling us something. We compare it with something that we had in our life. We get in touch with our pain that was similar to their pain, and we imagine, they must be feeling the way I felt when this happened to me. And we then impose that in and send that back, and the person does look upon that as empathy. The people we have the hardest, to have the hardest ability to have empathy towards are the people when we don't have any category for their pain. When they're sharing something about, and we have nothing in our history, nothing in our experience that corresponds, then we're going to come across them as very uncaring and lacking empathy. Because the fact of the matter is, no, we have zero pain. We can't imagine that. And in fact, we may even judge them pretty harshly and say, well, you shouldn't even feel bad about that. Okay? We'll say something like that. By the way, that's not a good thing to say. Don't say that. But the thing is, that's how we'll feel. So, you do have the right, and if something isn't working in a relationship, you try to find, a sane, stable, spiritual moment. You try to set aside, so listen, there's some things we need to talk about, and talk about it. But you don't threaten the end of the relationship. So anyway, I think you did what a lot of times we do. We don't speak until the pain has grown. You don't have to wait that long. The first time that you realize this is a problem, you can sit down and say, there's a problem in our relationship, I'd like to talk about it. And if they are in your inner circle and you're in their inner circle, then they have a commitment to you too. They're not going to want to lose that easily. Now, again, you have to have patience because most people do not know how to communicate well. They haven't been taught how to communicate well. They don't know the process of communication. So you're going to have to use a translator to try to say, well, what do they mean by that? And so, that's going to be necessary for you not to, because, most people simply don't know how to communicate well. I wish our high schools would teach people life skills that, I think, teaching people how to communicate effectively, solve relationship problems, set up boundaries, from junior high to high school, if we had classes like this, I think our whole country would be better off. Because, and again, I'm not against anything, but I think, the majority of people did not use an awful lot of classes they were given in high school. In other words, if you ask most people, when was the last time you used that class? Never, okay? So I think we need to start thinking about more practical education. Education is teaching people how to live, just not make a living.
This has been Healthy Boundaries with Dr. Norm Wise. Healthy Boundaries is part of the Life Seminar series taking place at Living Water Counseling at First Church West in Plantation, Florida. If you would like more information about the various life seminars, contact Living Water Counseling by visiting the website www.livingwatercoaching.com or call area code 954-452-4407. Thank you for listening. We hope this information is a blessing in your life.